2,000 years ago, humanity almost died. A rogue brown dwarf star wandered into the solar system. Its gravity pulled at Earth, slowly dragging the blue planet toward the sun. Scientists calculated that within 50 years, Earth would burn. 8 billion people watched the sky and waited for the end. Then the came. They were crystalline beings, their bodies made of living glass that sang when light passed through them. They traveled in a massive generation ship, carrying the last hope of their species to a new colony world. They had their own problems. They had their own mission. They had no reason to stop. But they stopped. A named looked at Earth and saw children playing in streets. He saw farmers working fields. He saw people who had no idea that strangers existed among the stars. And he made a choice. They diverted their generation ship. They used its engines to stabilize Earth's orbit, pushing against the brown dwarf's pull. The effort took everything they had. Their ship broke apart. Their colony supplies scattered across space. Their planned future died so that humanity could live. Sent one message to Earth before he disappeared into the void. You are not alone. Remember kindness. Then they were gone. They limped away in escape pods, eventually finding a small planet called Prime. There they built a new home, but they never recovered their numbers. They never rebuilt their strength. They had given too much. Humanity remembered. For 2,000 years, every human child learned the name. Every school taught the story of the crystalline strangers who saved a world and asked for nothing. They became legend, then history, then something almost holy. And then the message came. Ambassador was eating breakfast when her assistant burst through the door. His face was pale. His hands shook as he handed her a. He said, they're dying. The message was fragmented, broken by distance and desperation, but the meaning was clear. A species called the hegemony had come to Prime. They wanted the crystals that grew there, the same crystals that made up bodies. They did not care that there were people. They only cared about profit. 12,000 remained, the last of their kind, and they had perhaps 1 month before they killed them all. Took the message to the Galactic Concord, the council of elder species that governed known space. Surely, she thought, they would help. They had done nothing wrong. They were peaceful. They were innocent. The Concord listened. Then they voted. The answer was no. They have no strategic value, said Ambassador, a tall being with 4 arms and cold eyes. They cannot offer us trade. They cannot offer us technology. They cannot offer us military support. Why should we spend resources on 12,000 insignificant aliens? Stared at him because it's right. Made a sound that might have been laughter. Right. There is no profit in right. There is no power in right. The Conquered does not waste itself on sentiment. Left the Conquered chamber with rage burning in her chest. But beneath the rage, something else grew. Something that felt like purpose. She returned to Earth and called an emergency session of the United Terran Assembly. Representatives from every human faction gathered. The corporate states, the military councils, the colonial federations, even the isolationist Martian republics who rarely spoke to anyone. Stood before them and told the story. She showed them the message. She reminded them of the generation ship that broke apart saving their world, of the crystalline stranger who asked for nothing and gave everything. The Galactic Concord has refused to help, she said. They say they are not worth saving. They say sentiment is weakness. They say we should forget. She paused. The chamber was silent. I say we remember. The vote was immediate. It was unanimous. Every hand raised. Every voice spoke as one. Humanity would go to war. The news spread across human space within hours. Fleet Admiral received his orders while standing on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Gratitude. He was an old man with hair and tired eyes, but when he read the message, something in him came alive. All ships, he said quietly, prepare for deployment, we're going to Prime. His officers looked at him with confusion. Sir, the hegemony has 3 times our firepower. Their fleet is larger, more advanced, better armed. The odds of victory are— I don't care about odds, said. He turned to face his crew, and his voice carried the weight of 2,000 years. In 2156, a stranger named looked at our dying world and decided we were worth saving. He didn't calculate odds. He didn't measure our strategic value. He just helped. His hands tightened on the railing. They saved 8 billion human souls. They never asked for thanks. Now 12,000 of them need us, and we will go to them. We will fight for them. We will die for them if we must, because that is what humans do. We remember our debts, and we pay them. The crew stood. Something passed between them, something old and powerful. They were afraid, but they were also proud. Across human space, the mobilization began. Warships powered up their engines. Transports loaded soldiers and supplies. Civilian vessels volunteered to carry equipment. Factories worked day and night building weapons and armor. And everywhere people whispered the same words, for the ones who came for us first. On Prime, the huddled in their last city. The ships orbited above them, blocking out the stars. They had accepted death. They had made peace with extinction. Then their sensors detected something impossible. A fleet was coming. A human fleet. Hundreds of ships burning across the void, coming faster than anyone thought possible. Elder, the oldest of her kind, touched the communication console with trembling crystalline fingers. She sent a message to the approaching fleet, her voice breaking with confusion and hope. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you come for us? We are so few, you will lose so many." Admiral's response crossed the stars. "Because 2,000 years ago, one of you asked the same question and came anyway." The wept tears of living light, and for the first time in months, they dared to hope. Humanity was coming, and humanity remembered. Prometheus was the largest military installation humanity had ever built. It floated in deep space, far from any sun, a massive structure of metal and light that could hold 1,000 ships. For 20 years, it had been mostly empty, a symbol of strength that nobody expected to use. Now it was full. Ships arrived every hour. Destroyers and cruisers and carriers, their hulls painted with the flags of 100 different human nations. Civilian transports came too, their cargo holds stuffed with medical supplies and food and ammunition. Small personal vessels appeared, piloted by volunteers who had no military training but refused to stay home. Admiral stood at the observation deck and watched them come. Every ship that arrived made his heart heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because he knew many of these people would die. Lighter because he knew they had chosen to come anyway. "Sir," his aide said, approaching with "We have a problem." "Took thee and read." The problem was simple: too many volunteers. The military could not process them fast enough. People were arriving faster than the system could handle. Retired soldiers, factory workers, teachers, doctors, students barely old enough to fight. They all wanted to help. "Tell them to wait," said. "We'll find room for everyone who wants to serve." The aide hesitated. "Sir, many of them have no combat experience. Some have never even been in space before. They'll die." "They know that," said quietly. "They're coming anyway, that's what makes them human." Word of the gathering fleet spread across the galaxy. The Galactic Concord watched with confusion and contempt. Ambassador called an emergency meeting to discuss the human situation. "This is madness," declared to the assembled representatives. "The humans are throwing away their military strength for a worthless cause. They will weaken themselves and gain nothing. This is why younger species should not be trusted with power." But not everyone agreed. In the back of the chamber, smaller delegations whispered to each other. Species who had never spoken before found common ground in a shared emotion: admiration. Demanded an audience with Ambassador. She agreed to meet him at Prometheus, where she was coordinating supply shipments. He arrived expecting to intimidate her. Instead, He found her calm and focused, reviewing logistics reports while ships launched around her. "You are making a mistake," said. "The hegemony will destroy your fleet. Your species will be weakened for generations. And for what? 12,000 aliens who cannot help you." Looked up from her work. Her eyes were tired but clear. "Tell me, Ambassador," she said. "In your long history, has anyone ever helped your species without expecting something in return?" Paused. The question seemed to confuse him. "Help is a transaction," he said finally. "One gives in order to receive. This is the foundation of civilization." Smiled sadly. "And that is why your civilization is dying." "Dying? The conquered has existed for 10,000 years. "Yes, and in those 10,000 years, how many species have joined you willingly? How many have stayed because they wanted to, not because they had to? You measure worth in what someone can give you. We measure it in what someone was willing to give." She turned back to her work. "They gave us everything, they expected nothing. Now we will do the same. You call it madness, we call it being human." Left without another word. But something in him was troubled, a small crack in the certainty he had carried for centuries. In the fleet's engineering bays, human workers performed miracles of desperate creativity. Human ships were not elegant. Other species built vessels like works of art, smooth and beautiful and efficient. Human ships were ugly. They were covered in redundant systems, backup generators, emergency patches, and modifications that made no logical sense. But human ships did one thing better than any other. They refused to die. Chief Engineer Martinez stood in the middle of a cargo bay, shouting orders at her team. They were converting a civilian transport into a troop carrier. It was impossible work. They had 3 days to do a job that should take 3 months. "More armor on the lower decks," shouted. "If we lose the engines, I want the crew compartments to survive impact." "That's not standard design," someone protested. "Nothing about this is standard. We're going to fight a fleet 3 times our size. The only way we win is if our ships keep fighting after they should be dead. Now get me more armor." Across the station, similar scenes played out. Human engineers built ships that broke every rule of elegant design. They added extra life support. They installed manual overrides for every system. They welded emergency handles onto every door so crews could escape burning compartments. The ships were ugly. They were inefficient. And they were terrifying because they were built by people who expected to die and wanted to make their deaths count. Then the unexpected allies began to arrive. First came the traders, a species of small furry beings who dealt in medical supplies. They brought 3 cargo ships full of medicine, bandages, and surgical equipment. "We cannot fight," their leader said, "but we can heal. Let us help." Next came a reclusive species who lived on a single frozen world. They brought shield technology that no one else had ever seen. "This is our gift," they said. "Use it well." Then came the beings who had no formal relations with humanity. They sent a single warship, old and battered but still deadly. Their message was simple: "We too were once saved by strangers. We remember." More came, small delegations, single ships, messages of support, species who had nothing to gain and everything to lose, choosing to stand with humanity. The Galactic Conquered was horrified. This was not supposed to happen. The younger species were supposed to watch and learn that sentiment was foolishness. Instead, they were being inspired. On the flagship, Eternal Gratitude, Admiral received a private message from Elder. Her crystalline voice was weak with age and fear. "Admiral," she said, "I must ask you something that I have no right to ask." "Ask anything," replied. "Why do you truly come for us? We are old, we are few, we have nothing to offer you. Your people will die for us. How can you justify this to their families?" Was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle. "Elder 2,000 years ago looked at our world and saw strangers. He had no reason to help us. He had his own mission, his own people, his own future. But he stopped anyway. He gave up everything for people he had never met. His eyes grew distant, looking at something far away. My grandmother told me his story when I was a child. She said that proved something important, that the universe is not cold and empty, that kindness exists even between strangers, that help can come from the most unexpected places. He looked directly into the camera. We do not come to repay a debt. Debt can be calculated. What gave us cannot be measured. We come because we want to be the kind of species that deserves what he did for us. We come because we want the universe to be the kind of place where strangers save strangers. We come because this is who we choose to be. Elder's crystalline form trembled with emotion she could not name. "Then come," she whispered, "come and show the galaxy what humans truly are." The fleet began to move. Hundreds of ships, carrying thousands of humans who had chosen to die for strangers. They burned toward prime, toward battle, toward destiny. And the galaxy watched, waiting to see what would happen when a species that remembered its debts finally had a chance to pay them back. Prime was beautiful. From space, the planet glowed with soft light. Crystalline forests covered its surface, catching the sun and scattering rainbows across the land. Shimmering seas reflected the stars. It was a world of glass and light, delicate and ancient and precious. Now it was. Mining ships had carved ugly wounds into the planet's surface. Smoke rose from burning forests. The crystal that gave the world its beauty was being ripped from the ground and loaded onto cargo vessels. The fleet orbited above, 300 warships arranged in perfect formation. They were confident. They were powerful. They had conquered 17 species and never lost a war. Their warlord sat on his command throne and watched his empire grow richer by the hour. Then his sensors screamed. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace like an explosion of light. 247 ships appeared at once, their engines burning hot, their weapons already charging. They came in perfect formation, a wall of metal and fury aimed directly at the. And they were broadcasting music. Stared at his screens in confusion. The human ships were playing music on all frequencies, symphonies and battle hymns and songs of hope, filling the void with sound. It was not a military tactic. It was not a logical choice. It was something they had never encountered before. It was humans being human. "What is this?" demanded. "What are they doing?" His tactical officer shook his head. "Unknown, warlord, they are singing." Singing made a sound of contempt. "Destroy them." The fleet moved, 300 ships against 247, superior firepower against desperate courage. The math was simple. The outcome was certain. But the math had never met humans before. The first volley tore into the human fleet. Ships exploded. Hulls cracked. Atmosphere vented into the void. They expected the humans to retreat, to realize their mistake, to beg for mercy. Instead, the humans accelerated. Burning ships continued firing. Vessels with half their systems destroyed kept moving forward. Crews whose compartments were open to space sealed their suits and stayed at their stations. The human fleet did not retreat. It did not slow down. It attacked. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Eternal Gratitude, watching his fleet take damage. His face was calm, but his hands gripped the railing until his knuckles turned white. "Execute Protocol Thermopylae," he said quietly. His officers hesitated. Protocol Thermopylae was a suicide attack. 1/3 of the fleet would charge directly at the command ship, accepting total destruction to break the enemy's coordination. "Sir," his first officer said, "that's 80 ships, 12,000 people." "I know," his voice cracked, and they all volunteered. "Send the order." 80 ships broke formation. They accelerated toward the flagship, ignoring all other targets. The focused fire on them, tearing them apart one by one. Ships died in fire and silence. Crews burned so that their comrades could live. 50 ships remained, then 30, then 10. Captain commanded the destroyer Remembrance. His ship was crippled. His engines were dying. His crew was dead or dying. But his weapons still worked and his target was the flagship. "All hands," he said into the shipwide comm. "It has been an honor." He pushed his failing engines to maximum. The Remembrance screamed through space, a broken arrow aimed at the heart of the enemy. His final transmission reached the fleet, for the ones who came for us first. The Remembrance struck the flagship's engine core and detonated. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface. The command structure collapsed in an instant. Their coordination broke, their formation scattered, and the human fleet surged forward into the gap. On the ground, human Marines were already falling from the sky. Lieutenant Commander led the first wave. Her shook with anti-aircraft fire as it descended toward the last city. She gripped her weapon and prayed. The landing was hard, 3 didn't make it, but's boots hit soil and she started running. The city was beautiful even in ruin. Crystal spires rose toward the sky, cracked but still shining. Civilians huddled in shelters, their bodies dim with fear. Ground troops were advancing, ready to finish the slaughter. "Form up," shouted. "We hold this line, nobody gets through." Her Marines spread out, taking cover behind fallen crystal pillars. They were outnumbered. They were scared. They did not retreat. They attacked in waves. Human soldiers fell, one by one, holding their positions until they could hold no longer. Medics dragged wounded Marines to safety while still taking fire. Engineers rigged explosives with shaking hands. Everyone fought. Found herself defending a shelter full of children. Their crystalline bodies trembled with fear, and their eyes reflected her face 1,000 times. "It's okay," she told them, not knowing if they understood her words. "We're here, we're not leaving." A soldier burst through the entrance, shot him before he could fire. Another came. She shot him too. Her ammunition ran low. Her arm bled from a wound she couldn't remember receiving. But she did not move. Above them, the space battle reached its climax. The human fleet pushed forward, accepting terrible losses to break the formation. Ships fought until they were nothing but debris. Crews stayed at their stations until the air ran out. And slowly, impossibly, they began to retreat. Watched from his damaged flagship as his fleet scattered, he could not understand what he was seeing. The humans had been outnumbered. They had been. By every measure, they should have lost. But they had not calculated the cost. They had not weighed the odds. They had simply fought with everything they had for people they had never met. "Fall back," ordered, his voice hollow with shock. "All ships fall back." The fleet fled. The humans did not pursue. They were too damaged, too exhausted, too few. But they had won. On the ground, watched the last soldier's retreat. Her legs gave out and she slumped against a crystal wall. Around her, surviving Marines sat in the rubble, too tired to speak. They emerged from their shelters. They looked at the human soldiers with expressions no one could read. These strange beings had come across the stars to die for them. Many had died. Those who remained were bleeding, broken, barely alive. An elderly approached. Her crystalline body was ancient and cracked, but her light was warm. She knelt beside the wounded Marine and touched her face with gentle fingers. "Why?" they asked. "Why did you come?" Looked up at her. Tears cut tracks through the dirt and blood on her face. "Because you're family," she said. "You just didn't know it yet." The light flickered with emotion that had no name in any language. She began to sing, a soft crystalline tone that echoed through the ruined city. Others joined her, one by one, until the air was filled with music. It was a song of gratitude, a song of grief, a song of wonder. Above them, in the wreckage of 47 destroyed ships, 8,000 humans floated in the silence of space. They had given everything, and they would never know that their sacrifice had worked. but they would be remembered. Every name, every face, every choice they had made to come here and die for strangers. The Battle of Prime was over, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The galaxy watched the aftermath in silence. Footage spread across every inhabited world, ships burning in the void, soldiers standing guard over alien children, Captain's final transmission playing again and again, faces of the dead scrolling endlessly across memorial screens. 47 ships destroyed, 8,312 humans dead, for 12,000 aliens who could never repay them. The Galactic Concord called an emergency session. For the first time in centuries, the ancient council chamber was truly quiet. No one knew what to say. Ambassador sat in his elevated seat and stared at the floor. His certainty had cracked at Prometheus. Now it shattered completely. Everything he believed about the universe, about power, about the nature of civilization, seemed suddenly small and hollow. Addressed the council. She was exhausted, her eyes red from grief, her voice rough from crying. But she stood straight and spoke clearly. "We did not come here to ask for your help," she said. "We came to tell you what we learned." She gestured, and images appeared in the air above the council chamber. Faces of the fallen, human and even a few aliens from other species who had joined the fight. These people died for strangers. They knew the odds. They knew they might never come home. They came anyway, not for profit, not for power, not for glory. They came because 2,000 years ago someone helped us when we needed it, and we wanted to be worthy of that gift. His voice grew stronger. "Your council voted to let them die. You said they had no strategic value. You said sentiment was weakness. You were wrong. Sentiment is not weakness. It is the strongest force in the universe. It is the force that makes strangers into family. It is the force that builds civilizations worth living in. It is the force that made my people cross the stars to die for beings they had never met." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every representative. "We are not asking you to change. We are telling you that we have changed, and the galaxy will never be the same." She left the chamber without waiting for a response. On Prime, the survivors gathered to honor the fallen. Elder stood before her people, her ancient crystalline body shining with a light that none of them had seen before. It was the light of hope. 2,000 years ago," she said, "my ancestor saved a world of strangers. He did it because it was right. He expected nothing in return. He believed that kindness was its own reward." Her voice trembled with emotion. "Today we know that he was wrong. Kindness is not its own reward. Kindness is an investment, not in trade or profit or power, but in the soul of the universe. What he planted 2,000 years ago has grown into something beyond imagination. Strangers came from across the stars to die for us. They called us family. They gave us everything." She turned to face the human soldiers who stood among them, bandaged and weary but alive. "We have no way to repay what you have given, but we can honor it. From this day forward, the word for stranger will mean human. The word for hope will share the same root as the word for earth. Your names will be taught to our children. Your sacrifice will be remembered for as long as our species exists." They sang, the humans wept, and something new was born in the space between them. The ripples spread fast. On a dozen worlds, species who had watched the battle began to talk. They spoke of ancient debts unpaid, of help received long ago from species now forgotten, of kindness that had never been returned. The who had given shield technology to the human fleet called a council of their elders. They searched their ancient records and found the name of a species that had saved them from a plague centuries before. That species was gone now, but they had descendants. They began building a fleet to find them. They who had sent a single warship to fight alongside humans received messages from other species. "You remembered," the messages said. "You honored an old debt, teach us how." The traders, who had brought medical supplies, found their trade routes crowded with new customers. Species wanted to do business with beings who valued more than profit. They had never been rich. Now they were becoming wealthy beyond measure. And everywhere, people whispered about the humans. They remember everything, the whispers said. The kindness and the cruelty. They always pay their debts, always. The hegemony was in chaos. Warlord sat in his damaged flagship and tried to understand what had happened. He had conquered 17 species. None of them had ever come back. None of them had ever fought for each other. The universe was supposed to work a certain way. The strong took, the weak submitted, and sentiment was foolishness. But the humans had broken the rules. They had fought for strangers. They had died for people who could not help them, and they had won. Now the species that had conquered were restless. They had seen that they could be beaten. More importantly, they had seen that someone would come. Someone would fight for the weak. Someone would remember. The first rebellion started on a mining world, then another, then another. They did not have enough ships to fight everywhere at once. Their empire was crumbling. On Earth, the government built a monument. They called it the Monument of Reciprocity. It stood in the center of a great plaza, a tower of crystal and steel that reached toward the sky. Inside, carved into walls of stone, were the names of every human who had died at Prime. Beside each name was a story, not the story of their death, but the story of the crystalline stranger who had saved their world and asked for nothing in return. The monument's inscription was simple: "We remember, we repay, we are human." Came from every nation to see it. They touched the names and read the stories and learned what it meant to be worthy of the gift that had been given to them. Ambassador watched the first visitors and smiled through her tears. The dead were not truly gone. They lived in every child who learned their names, in every story that was told, in every choice that was made to honor what they had done. Then the delegations began to arrive. Ships came from across the galaxy. Not warships, but peaceful vessels carrying representatives of species that humanity had never contacted. They came with stories. 500 years ago, a passing ship saved us from an asteroid. We never learned their name. Can you help us find their descendants? Our ancestors were refugees once. A species gave us shelter. We forgot to thank them. We want to remember now. We have a debt unpaid. We have always been ashamed. Can you teach us how to repay it? Humanity listened. Humanity helped. And slowly, impossibly, a new kind of alliance began to form. They called it the Compact of Remembrance. It was not based on trade or power or strategic advantage. It was based on a simple idea: any species that had ever helped another had a claim to aid. Any debt, no matter how old, could be repaid. The Galactic Concord called it foolishness. The compact would never work. The universe did not run on sentiment. 37 species signed in the first year. In a prison cell on a distant world, Warlord received an unexpected visitor. Admiral walked into the cell and sat down across from the defeated conqueror. The two men looked at each other in silence. "I don't understand," said finally. "How did you fight like that? You are not stronger than us. You are not faster. You are not smarter. By every measure, we should have won. What makes humans different?" Was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, and his eyes were bright with something that could not name. "We remember everything," said softly. "The kindness and the cruelty. We remember who helped us. We remember who hurt us. And we always pay our debts." He stood to leave. "You built your empire on the belief that no one would come for the weak, that no one would fight for strangers. That sentiment was foolishness." He looked back at the fallen warlord. "You were wrong, and now the galaxy knows it." He walked away, leaving alone with his thoughts. The ripple effect continued, and nothing would ever be the same. 500 years passed. The galaxy transformed. The Compact of Remembrance grew from 37 species to 300. It became the dominant force in known space, not through conquest or intimidation, but through something far more powerful: trust. Species competed to help each other. When one world faced disaster, a dozen others sent aid. When one species needed technology, their neighbors shared freely. Debts were remembered and repaid, sometimes centuries after they were created. The old galactic Concord still existed, but it was small and shrinking. Their philosophy of cold calculation and strategic selfishness could not compete with the simple power of loyalty. Young species did not want to join a council that measured worth in profit. They wanted to belong to something that would remember them, something that would come for them when they needed help. The hegemony was gone. It had taken 200 years, but the empire that had once conquered 17 species collapsed from within, not from military defeat, but from internal transformation. The species that had enslaved learned something new from the humans: that help was possible, that kindness could be repaid, that no one had to face the darkness alone. One by one, the conquered species began practicing remembrance. They helped each other. They honored old debts. They became something new. They themselves changed most of all. The descendants of looked back at their history with shame. They taught their children about the folly of forgetting, about the cost of cruelty, about the power of kindness. They became members of the Compact. Their warrior culture transformed into a culture of guardians. They swore to protect the weak. They swore to remember the strong. They swore to never again be the monsters they had once been. They flourished. The 12,000 survivors had grown to 12 million. They spread across 3 worlds, their crystalline forests glowing under alien suns. Their technology, freely shared with humanity, revolutionized medicine and computing and art. They called humans, which meant the ones who completed the circle. Every child learned the human names, who had refused to accept the conquered's answer, who had led the fleet into impossible odds, who had given his life to break the enemy, who had held the line when hope was lost. Every human child learned, the crystalline stranger who had started it all. Alien scholars from across the galaxy studied human history obsessively. They wanted to understand how a species so young, so small, so fragile, had become the moral center of a galactic civilization. They read about human wars and human cruelty. They saw that humans were capable of terrible things, but they also read about human kindness. They saw villages rebuilding neighbors' homes after storms. They saw soldiers carrying wounded enemies to safety. They saw strangers running toward danger to help people they had never met. A philosopher named Al wrote a famous essay about her findings. The title was simple: The Human Paradox. Humans evolved not for dominance but for community, she wrote. Their greatest weapon was never fire or the atom. It was the compulsion to repay kindness. They remember everything: the good and the bad, the help given and the harm done. And they believe, with a faith that borders on madness, that these things matter. Other species build empires on power. Humans build civilizations on debt. And somehow, impossibly, their way works better. On the 500th anniversary of the Battle of Prime, a ceremony was held. Representatives from every species in the Compact gathered on Prime, in the same city where human soldiers had once stood guard over crystalline children. The city was rebuilt now, more beautiful than before, a blend of crystal and human steel. Elder's great-great-granddaughter addressed the assembly. Her name was, and she served as the representative to the Compact. She was young by standards, her crystalline body shining with inner light. 500 years ago, she said, a species we had barely met came to die for us. They crossed the stars with weapons in their hands and music in their hearts. They did not ask if we were worthy. They did not calculate the cost. They simply remembered that once, when they needed help, someone came, and they decided that this memory was worth more than their lives. Her voice echoed across the gathering. Today, the galaxy is not ruled by the strongest or the cleverest. It is shaped by those who remember. Humanity taught us that civilization is not built on power. It is built on debts honored. She paused, looking out at the assembled species. Former enemies stood beside former friends. Ancient rivals shared the same sunlight. The galaxy had changed. They assisted us once, said, and the payback altered destiny, not just our destiny but everyone's. On Earth, in the Monument of Reciprocity, a child traced the names of the fallen. She was 7 years old, with dark hair and curious eyes. Her grandmother stood beside her, watching patiently as small fingers moved across the carved stone. "Grandmother," the child said, "will we always remember?" The grandmother smiled. She had asked the same question when she was young. Her mother had asked it before her, and her mother before that. "Yes," she said, "that is what makes us human." The child nodded, accepting this truth as simply as she accepted the sunrise. She continued reading the names. Outside the monument, the world continued turning. Ships launched toward distant stars, carrying humans to new worlds, new challenges, new opportunities to help and be helped. The compact grew stronger every year. The old ways of fear and calculation faded into history. And somewhere in the crystal forests of Prime, a statue stood in a place of honor. It depicted a named reaching toward the stars. Beside him stood a human figure reaching back. The inscription read, "It began with kindness, it continues with memory, it never ends." Had saved humanity 2,000 years ago. He had asked for nothing in return. He had believed that his sacrifice would be forgotten, that the universe was too vast and cold for gratitude to survive. He was wrong. Humanity remembered, humanity repaid, and in doing so they changed everything. The galaxy was no longer a place where the strong preyed on the weak. It was a place where debts were honored, where kindness was repaid, where no one faced the darkness alone. It was a place where strangers became family. And it all started because one species refused to forget. The end is never truly the end. Every act of kindness plants a seed. Every debt repaid grows into something new. The circle continues, generation after generation, species after species, reaching across the void. This is the lesson that humanity taught the galaxy. The universe remembers. The universe repays. The universe rewards those who honor their debts. And destiny is not fixed. Destiny is not written in the stars. Destiny is written in the choices we make, the kindnesses we offer, the debts we honor. They assisted humans once. And the payback altered destiny. Forever,